One whisper. That's all it cost Clara to lose her job, her apartment, and her dignity. She was just a waitress at the city's most exclusive restaurant, invisible to the elite. But when she saw the fiancé of the city's most powerful billionaire, Julian Thorne, kissing another man in a dark booth, she made a choice. She chose the truth. She walked up to the table and shattered his world. She expected a thank you. Instead, she was fired. But she didn't know that this single act of bravery would lead to a proposition worth billions, a fake marriage, and a love story dangerous enough to kill for. The air inside the Sapphire Lounge always smelled of cold money, a mix of imported leather, truffle oil, and the distinct, metallic scent of chilled hostility. Clara Vance adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. Her feet throbbed in her cheap non-slip shoes, a sharp contrast to the Louboutin heels clicking across the marble floors around her. She was 24, working double shifts to pay off her late father's medical debts, and invisible. That was the first rule of working at the Sapphire: be a ghost. Refill the Dom Perignon, sweep away the crumbs of the sourdough, and never, ever make eye contact unless spoken to. She was good at being invisible. Until tonight. It was 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Booth 4, the most secluded spot in the restaurant, was occupied by a woman who looked like a porcelain doll dipped in diamonds. Vanessa Sterling. The tabloids called her the ace queen of Manhattan, and she was engaged to Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Global, and the city's most eligible bachelor. But the man holding Vanessa's hand across the table was not Julian Thorne. Clara paused near the service station, clutching a water pitcher, her heart hammered against her ribs. The man was darker, with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow. Clara recognized him from the business section of the newspaper left on a table earlier. Silas Vance. No relation to her, but known as Julian Thorne's fiercest business rival. He was the man trying to hostilely take over Julian's tech empire. Clara stepped closer, feigning the need to polish a nearby glass. "He suspects nothing," Vanessa whispered, her voice a silky purr. She swirled her martini, the olive bobbing like a drowned hope. "Julian is too busy trying to close the Tokyo deal. He's trusting to a fault." Silas chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "And the prenup?" "Ironclad on my end," Vanessa smirked. "Once we marry next week, I get 40% of his shares if we divorce after a year. We just have to wait 12 months, Silas. Then I'll divorce him, transfer the voting rights to you, and Thorne Global is ours." Clara's grip on the pitcher tightened until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't just an affair. It was corporate assassination. Julian Thorne was a regular here. Unlike the other patrons who snapped their fingers at her, Julian always looked her in the eye and said thank you. He looked tired, carrying the weight of a billion-dollar legacy, but he was kind. "Excuse me?" a deep voice rumbled behind Clara. She jumped, nearly dropping the pitcher. She spun around to see Julian Thorne himself standing there. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, holding a bouquet of white lilies. He was early. He wanted to surprise Vanessa. "I believe my fiancé is in booth 4? Julian asked, his blue eyes warm but weary. Clara looked at him, then back at the booth where Vanessa was currently leaning over the table, her lips inches from Silas's. Time seemed to freeze. If Clara said nothing, Julian would walk over there and see it himself. But the booth was high-walled. He wouldn't see them until he was right on top of them, and Silas looked dangerous. If a fight broke out, "Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her voice trembling, "please, don't go over there." Julian frowned, his brow furrowing. "Excuse me? Do I know you?" "I'm just a waitress, sir, but you don't want to see what's happening in that booth." Julian's expression hardened, the warmth evaporated, replaced by the icy demeanor of a CEO who didn't like being told what to do. "Step aside, miss." "She's with Silas Vance," Clara blurted out. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. The restaurant fell silent nearby. Julian froze. The color drained from his face. "What did you say?" "She's cheating on you, sir. They are planning to take your company. I heard them discussing the shares and the prenup." For a second, Julian looked at her, really looked at her, with intense vulnerability. Then, the anger took over. He brushed past her, storming toward booth 4. Clara followed, terrified but unable to look away. Julian reached the booth. Vanessa and Silas were pulling apart, looking flushed. Silas smirked, leaning back as if he owned the place. Vanessa's eyes went wide, feigning shock. "Julian!" she gasped, standing up and smoothing her Versace dress. "Darling, you're early. I was just—" "Silas and I were discussing a peace treaty for the merger." "Is that what they call it now?" Julian's voice was lethal, quiet. "My waitress tells me you were discussing waiting a year to strip me of my shares." Vanessa's face twisted into a mask of ugly rage. She pointed a manicured finger at Clara, who was standing a few feet back. "Her?" Vanessa shrieked, causing the entire dining room to turn. "You're listening to the help?" "Julian, look at her. She's been hovering around our table all night, fishing for a tip. She's jealous. She's lying to cause a scene because I complained about her service earlier." Silas stood up, buttoning his jacket. "It's true, Thorne. Sad, really. Your staff is quite unprofessional." Julian looked at Vanessa, then at Silas, and finally at Clara. Clara stood tall, despite her shaking hands. "I'm not lying, Mr. Thorne. They called you trusting to a fault." "Get the manager!" Vanessa screamed. The floor manager, a sweaty man named Henri, came running. "Mr. Thorne! Miss Sterling! Is there a problem?" "This girl," Vanessa hissed, "accused me of infidelity and corporate espionage. Fire her, now, or I will ensure no one from my social circle ever sets foot in this dump again." Henri turned on Clara, his face red. "Clara, hand over your apron. You're done." "But Henri, she's lying." "Now," Henri barked. Clara looked at Julian, begging him to intervene. "Mr. Thorne?" Julian's jaw was set tight. He looked at Vanessa, who was sobbing fake tears into a silk handkerchief. He looked at the ring on her finger. A 10-carat diamond. He didn't want to believe it. It was easier to believe the waitress was crazy than to accept his entire life was a lie. "Leave," Julian said, not looking at Clara. The word hit her like a physical blow. Clara untied her apron, let it drop to the floor, and walked out of the Sapphire Lounge and into the rainy New York night. She had done the right thing, and it had cost her everything. But she didn't see what happened after she left. She didn't see Julian pull his hand away from Vanessa. She didn't see him signal his head of security, who was standing in the shadows. "Pull the security tapes," Julian whispered to his guard. "Now." 3 days later, Clara was sitting on the floor of her tiny studio apartment in Queens, staring at an eviction notice. 3 months overdue rent. Vacate in 48 hours. She had applied to 5 restaurants, but Henri had blacklisted her. Troublemaker, the reference check said. She had $12 in her checking account and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. A knock on the door made her jump. It was a heavy, authoritative knock. Not the landlord. She opened the door a crack. Standing in her dimly lit hallway was a man in a black suit, wearing an earpiece. Behind him stood Julian Thorne. Clara tried to slam the door, but the bodyguard blocked it with a massive hand. "Miss Vance," Julian said. His voice was rougher than before. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Clara snapped, her pride the only thing she had left. "You let me get fired for telling you the truth. Go back to your fiancée." "She's not my fiancée anymore," Julian said. Clara paused. She opened the door wider. Julian stepped into the tiny apartment. He looked painfully out of place in his tailored Italian suit amidst her peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture. He glanced at the eviction notice on the floor but didn't comment. "I watched the tapes," Julian said, turning to face her. "Audio and video. You were right. About everything. Silas admitted it after I threatened to bury him in legal fees for the next century." "Good for you." Clara crossed her arms. "Did you come here to give me my job back?" "Because I don't want it." "No," Julian said. "I came here to offer you a different job." He pulled a folded document from his inside pocket and placed it on her wobbly kitchen table. My grandfather's will has a clause. Julian began, pacing the small room. To inherit the controlling interest in Thorn Global and keep it away from my board of directors, who are currently trying to oust me, I must be married by my 30th birthday. Clara frowned. Okay. My 30th birthday is in 2 days, Clara. Clara's eyes went wide. So, go find a model. Go find another socialite. I can't, Julian said, his eyes darkening. Vanessa has poisoned the well. She's told every eligible woman in our circle that I'm abusive, paranoid, and broke. She's trying to isolate me so Silas can swoop in. If I don't marry by Saturday, I lose the company. I lose my legacy, everything my father built. He stepped closer to her. The scent of expensive cologne filled the room, masking the smell of old rain. I need a wife, Clara, but more importantly, I need someone who isn't one of them. I need someone who isn't looking for an angle. You risked your livelihood to tell a stranger the truth. You are the only honest person I have met in 10 years. Clara laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You want to marry me? I'm a waitress, Julian. I'm nobody. You're perfect, he corrected. Here is the deal. We marry on Friday. We stay married for 1 year. You live in my penthouse. You attend galas with me. You act the part of the doting wife to save my image. And in return? Clara asked, skepticism heavy in her voice. I pay off your father's medical debts, all of them. I buy this building and give the deed to your mother. And at the end of the year, you walk away with $10 million. The room spun. $10 million. It was a number so big it didn't feel real. It meant freedom. It meant her mother could stop cleaning houses. It meant she could go to culinary school in Paris. Why should I trust you? Clara asked softly. You threw me to the wolves at the restaurant. I was a fool, Julian admitted, his gaze intense. I was hurt and I lashed out, but I am begging you now. Help me save my company. Help me destroy Vanessa and Silas. Clara looked at the eviction notice. She looked at Julian's desperate blue eyes. 1 year, she asked. 1 year, a business arrangement, strictly professional. Clara took a deep breath. She grabbed a cheap ballpoint pen from the counter. Where do I sign? Julian exhaled, a sound of immense relief. Right there on the bottom line. As she signed her name, Clara Vance, she didn't notice the way Julian watched her. It wasn't just relief in his eyes. It was fascination. Pack a bag, Julian said, taking the contract. We're going to Bergdorf Goodman. If you're going to be Mrs. Thorne, we have a lot of work to do. The engagement party is tonight. Tonight! Clara shrieked. Yes, and guess who is on the guest list? Julian's lips curled into a vengeful smile. Vanessa. She thinks I'm coming to beg for her back. I can't wait to introduce her to my new fiancé. The VIP suite at Bergdorf Goodman was larger than Clara's entire apartment. Mirrors lined every wall, reflecting a version of Clara she barely recognized. Julian sat on a velvet-tufted sofa, scrolling through emails on his phone, but every time Clara stepped out of the dressing room, his thumb stopped moving. No, Julian said flatly, waving his hand at a strapless red gown. Too aggressive. We aren't trying to sell sex. We are selling class. We are selling the idea that you are the hidden gem I've been keeping secret for months. Clara sighed, stepping back behind the curtain. I feel like a Barbie doll, Julian, a very expensive, terrified Barbie doll. You're doing fine, his voice came through the curtain. Just remember the backstory. We met at a charity auction 6 months ago. You're an art restorer. It explains why you're quiet and observant. Art restorer, Clara muttered, pulling on the next option. I can barely restore a sandwich. She stepped out. This time, the room went silent. She was wearing a midnight blue velvet gown by Oscar de la Renta. It had long sleeves, a high neck, but a back that plunged dangerously low. It hugged her curves in a way that was modest, yet devastatingly alluring. The deep blue made her pale skin glow and her dark eyes pop. Julian stood up slowly. He didn't check his phone. He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Is it bad? Clara fidgeted with the silk skirt. It's lethal, Julian whispered, clearing his throat. Wear the sapphires with it. the necklace my mother left me." An hour later, they were in the back of Julian's armored Rolls-Royce Phantom, weaving through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. The engagement gala was being held at the Pierre Hotel. It was supposed to be Julian and Vanessa's night. "Vanessa will be there?" Julian said, his jaw tight as he looked out the window. "She thinks I'm coming alone to beg for forgiveness. She thinks she has won." "She hasn't met the new me," Clara said, though her stomach was doing somersaults. She touched the heavy sapphire necklace at her throat. It felt cold, like armor. The car stopped. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. "Ready, Mrs. Thorne?" Julian asked, offering his arm. "Technically, not yet," Clara replied. "Tonight you are." They stepped out. The paparazzi went wild. "Julian! Julian! Who is she?" "Where is Vanessa?" Julian ignored them, guiding Clara up the grand staircase with a possessive hand on the small of her back. Inside the ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and old money. A string quartet played softly in the corner. In the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne, stood Vanessa Sterling. She looked magnificent in gold, laughing at something Silas Vance was whispering in her ear. She looked like a queen on her throne. Then, the room quieted. A ripple of silence spread from the doorway as people noticed Julian, and the woman with him. Vanessa turned, her smile freezing in place. She blinked, confused. She squinted, trying to place the woman in the midnight blue dress. Julian marched Clara straight toward them. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. "Julian," Vanessa said, her voice high and tight, I didn't expect you to bring a guest." "I didn't bring a guest, Vanessa," Julian said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "I brought my fiancée." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Silas Vance choked on his drink. Vanessa's eyes widened, darting to the sapphire necklace around Clara's neck, the family heirloom she had been begging Julian to let her wear for months. "Her?" Vanessa hissed, dropping the facade. "The waitress? You brought the help to my gala." The crowd murmured. "Waitress?" Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she felt Julian's hand squeeze hers, anchoring her. Art restorer, she reminded herself. Future billionaire. Clara stepped forward, cutting off Julian before he could defend her. She looked Vanessa up and down with a cool, detached expression she had learned from serving snobby patrons for 5 years. "I'm afraid you're confused, Miss Sterling," Clara said, her voice smooth and steady. "I haven't served tables in quite some time. But I do recall serving you. You ordered the dry martini, and you ordered your lover, Mr. Vance, to wait a year before stealing Julian's company. I have an excellent memory for details. It's a requirement for my restoration work." The silence in the room was deafening. Vanessa turned pale. Silas looked like he wanted to punch a wall. "You little—" Vanessa lunged forward, but Silas grabbed her arm, holding her back. "Don't," Silas warned through gritted teeth. "Everyone is watching." Julian smiled, a shark-like grin that terrified the board members standing nearby. "Clara and I will be married this Friday. I expect everyone here to support the new leadership of Thorn Global. Now, if you'll excuse us, my fiancé and I have a waltz to attend to." Julian swept Clara onto the dance floor. As the music swelled, he pulled her close. "You were incredible," he whispered into her ear, his breath hot against her neck. "Did you see Silas's face? He looked like he swallowed a lemon." "I thought I was going to faint," Clara admitted, her legs trembling. "You didn't," Julian said, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart race. "You were born for this, Clara." For a moment, as they spun under the crystal chandeliers, Clara forgot about the contract. She forgot about the money. She just felt the strength of his arms, and the way the world seemed to fade away when he looked at her. But in the shadows of the ballroom, Vanessa Sterling was making a phone call. "Get me the New York Chronicle," she snarled into her phone. "I have a story about a gold-digging waitress that is going to ruin Julian Thorne forever." The wedding was a tactical operation. No guests, no flowers, just a judge in a private chamber at City Hall, 2 witnesses from Julian's legal team, and a prenuptial agreement that was thicker than a Bible. "I do," Clara said. "I do," Julian said. And just like that, the waitress from Queens became the wife of a man worth $20 billion. The move into Julian's penthouse overlooking Central Park was surreal. The place was a fortress of glass and steel. It was beautiful, but cold. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs of life. "Your wing is the East Wing," Julian said, pointing down a long corridor. "My suite is in the West. We have separate bathrooms, separate closets. The staff comes at 8 a.m. We eat breakfast together for appearances, but otherwise your time is your own." "Strictly professional," Clara repeated, clutching her small suitcase. "Strictly professional." Julian agreed. He loosened his tie, looking suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the gala had worn off. "I have to go to the office. Silas is calling an emergency board meeting to challenge my mental stability. He's using our sudden marriage as proof that I've lost my mind." "Go," Clara said. "When?" Julian paused at the door, looking back at her. "Thank you, Clara." When he left, the silence of the penthouse pressed in on her. She was rich, she was safe, but she had never felt more alone. The war started the next morning. Clara woke up to the sound of her phone blowing up. She had 500 missed calls, unknown numbers. She walked into the kitchen, where a private chef was preparing an omelet. On the marble island lay a copy of the New York Chronicle. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "The $1 billion tip, how a desperate waitress seduced Julian Thorne." There was a photo of her from her waitress days, looking tired and sweaty, next to a photo of her in the gown at the gala. The article was vicious. It claimed she was a high school dropout, true, that her father died in debt, true, and that she had entrapped Julian after a one-night stand. Lie. "Don't read it." Julian's voice came from the doorway. He was already dressed in a suit, holding a cup of black coffee. He looked furious. "They know about my dad," Clara whispered, her hand shaking. "They know about the debts. They're calling me a predator." "Vanessa gave them the info," Julian said, tossing the paper into the trash. "She hired a private investigator." "I can't go outside," Clara said, panic rising in her chest. "They're camped in the lobby. I saw them on the security feed." Julian walked over to her. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough to block out the rest of the room. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are Clara Thorne now. You don't hide. If you hide, they win. We're going to lunch at the Sapphire Lounge." Clara's eyes widened. "The restaurant where I worked? Where they fired me?" "Exactly," Julian smiled coldly. "We're going to show them that we have nothing to be ashamed of. Go get dressed. Put on the most expensive thing you own." 2 hours later, they walked into the Sapphire Lounge. The silence was instant. Henri, the manager who had fired her, turned pale gray. Julian requested the center table, the same table where he had sat with Vanessa. "Mr. Thorne," Henri stammered, sweating profusely. We are fully booked." "Make room," Julian said calmly. "Or I buy the building and turn it into a parking lot." Henri scrambled to clear a table. As they sat, the other diners whispered. Clara kept her head high, though she felt like throwing up. She saw her old co-workers peeking out from the kitchen. They looked at her with a mix of awe and jealousy. Then, a familiar figure approached the table. It wasn't a waiter. It was a woman in a sharp business suit. "Mr. Thorne," the woman said. "I'm Sarah Jenkins from the board of directors." Julian stiffened. "Sarah, this isn't a business lunch." "It is now," Sarah said, pulling up a chair uninvited. She glanced at Clara with open disdain. "The board is convening a vote of no confidence tomorrow, Julian. Silas Vance has presented evidence that this marriage is a sham, a frantic attempt to secure the inheritance clause." "Silas is a liar," Julian said. "Is he?" Sarah looked at Clara. "Mrs. Thorne, tell me. What is Julian's favorite color? What is the name of his first pet? Where does he keep his mother's ashes?" Clara froze. She didn't know. She didn't know anything about him. "She doesn't have to answer you," Julian snapped. "If she can't answer basic questions, the board will annul the marriage clause. Sarah said, standing up. "You have 24 hours to prove this is a real love match, Julian, or you're out as CEO." Sarah walked away. Julian put his head in his hands. "It's over. I can't prep you on 30 years of my life in 24 hours. Silas is going to quiz you in front of the board. If you slip up once, I lose the company." Clara looked at the defeated man across from her. She looked at the expensive food she couldn't eat. "We don't need 24 hours, Clara said softly. Julian looked up. "I'm a waitress, Julian. I remember orders. I remember faces. I remember details people think are invisible." She leaned across the table, her eyes fierce. "Take me home, open a bottle of wine, and talk to me. Tell me everything. I won't forget a single word." Julian looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a business partner. He saw a teammate. "Okay," he said, "let's go home." But as they left the restaurant, neither of them noticed the man in the trench coat sitting at the bar, photographing them with a long-range lens. He wasn't looking for love, he was looking for distance, and he snapped a photo of Julian flinching when Clara accidentally brushed his hand, proof that the intimacy was fake. The photo was sent directly to Silas Vance. Silas looked at the image on his phone and grinned. "Perfect. Tomorrow, we destroy them." The penthouse was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was 8 p.m. The board meeting was at 9 a.m. the next morning. 12 hours to manufacture a lifetime of love. Julian sat on the white leather sofa, loosening his tie until it hung limp around his neck. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man facing a firing squad. "Okay," Clara said, dropping a heavy stack of file folders onto the glass coffee table. She kicked off her heels and sat cross-legged on the floor opposite him. "I went through your public bios, your Wikipedia page, and 3 unauthorized biographies. I know you went to Exeter, then Harvard. I know you took over the company at 22 when your father died in a plane crash. I know you're allergic to shellfish." Julian poured 2 glasses of expensive Pinot Noir. He slid one across the table to her. "That's the resume. That's what Sarah and the board know. If you only recite facts, they'll know we're lying. A wife knows the things that aren't written down." Clara took a sip of the wine. It was rich and earthy. "Then tell me, what isn't written down?" Julian looked at the wine swirling in his glass. "My favorite color isn't blue, even though I wear it for branding. It's gray, like the ocean before a storm." Clara pulled a notepad closer. "Gray. Storm. Okay, next." "I don't keep my mother's ashes in a vault or on a mantelpiece," Julian said softly. "I keep them in a locket inside the glove box of my first car. An old '67 Mustang I keep in the garage in Connecticut. It was the only place we ever felt free." Clara stopped writing. She looked up at him. The hardness in his eyes was melting, revealing a deep old wound. "Why the car?" she asked gently. "Because my father wouldn't ride in it. It was too cheap for him, so it was just mine and hers." The room felt smaller suddenly, more intimate. "Your turn," Julian said, shifting his gaze to her. "If we are married, I need to know you too. Why did you work double shifts at the Sapphire? You mentioned debts." Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to being the one answering questions. "My dad, he had cancer. The insurance company found a loophole and dropped him 6 months before he passed. He spent his dying days worrying about money, about leaving my mom and me with nothing. I promised him on his deathbed I'd pay every cent back so Mom wouldn't lose the house." Julian watched her, his expression unreadable. "You sacrificed your 20s for a promise." "I'd do it again," Clara said fiercely. "I believe you." Julian leaned forward. "That's why I chose you, Clara. You have a code. Everyone in my world has a price, but you have a code." The air between them crackled. It wasn't just business anymore. They spent the next 6 hours talking. Not quizzing, talking. Julian told her about the pressure of the legacy, how he felt like an imposter in his own life. Clara told him about her dream of opening a small bakery, the smell of yeast and vanilla, the safety of a warm kitchen. Around 2 a.m., the conversation drifted to scars. "Silas has that scar on his eyebrow," Clara noted. "How did he get it?" "I gave it to him," Julian admitted, a dark smile playing on his lips. "Prep school." He insulted my mother. I broke a lacrosse stick over his head." Clara laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound that made Julian's chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. "And you," Clara asked, "do you have any battle wounds?" Julian hesitated. He began to unbutton his cuff, rolling up the sleeve of his white dress shirt to reveal a jagged, burn-like scar on his forearm. "Corporate sabotage," he said grimly. 3 years ago, a factory fire in one of our plants. I went in to make sure the staff got out. A beam collapsed. Clara reached out. Without thinking, she traced the line of the scar with her fingertips. Her skin was cool against his heat. Julian stopped breathing. He watched her hand, mesmerizingly gentle on his arm. "You're a good man, Julian Thorne," she whispered. "The papers are wrong about you." Julian caught her hand. His grip was firm, electric. He pulled her slightly closer. His face was inches from hers. The smell of rain and expensive wine surrounded them. He looked at her lips, then her eyes. "Clara," he murmured. The moment hung there, suspended on a wire. A kiss would break the contract. A kiss would make this real. And if it was real, it could be broken. Julian pulled back abruptly, standing up. "We should sleep." "The board eats the weak for breakfast." Clara felt a pang of disappointment she couldn't explain. She nodded, gathering her notes. "Right. Good night, Julian." "Good night, Clara." He watched her walk to the East Wing. He didn't tell her that for the first time in 10 years he didn't want to be alone. The boardroom of Thorne Global was designed to intimidate. A 50-foot table made of black obsidian sat in the center of a room with glass walls overlooking the entire city. 12 board members sat like vultures in leather chairs. At the head of the table sat Sarah Jenkins. To her right, smirking like a Cheshire cat, was Silas Vance. The doors opened. Julian walked in, looking sharp, rested, and dangerous. Clara walked beside him. She wore a cream-colored business suit Julian had bought for her, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a CEO's wife. "You're late," Silas drawled, checking his heavy gold watch. "We were busy," Julian said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Clara. "Marriage requires attention, Silas." "You wouldn't know, given your 3 divorces." A few board members chuckled. Silas's smile faltered. "Let's get to it," Sarah Jenkins interrupted, tapping a pen on the table. "This constitutes an emergency review of the CEO's competency. Specifically, the legitimacy of the marriage clause execution." She turned her cold eyes to Clara. "Mrs. Thorne, we have reviewed your background. It is colorful." "My background is honest," Clara said, her voice steady, "which is a rare commodity in this room, it seems." "Indeed," Silas interjected. He pressed a button on a remote. A large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It was the photo from yesterday, the one taken outside the restaurant. It showed Clara and Julian walking out. Clara's hand had brushed Julian's, and Julian was clearly flinching, his body language recoiling. "Look at this," Silas crowed, standing up and pointing at the screen. "A husband who flinches at his wife's touch? This isn't intimacy, this is revulsion. He hired her. He paid her to save his shares. It's fraud." The board murmured. The evidence was damning. "Julian has issues with touch," Clara said quickly. "He—" "Save it," Silas snapped. "We have a witness." Henri, the manager of the Sapphire Lounge, is on speakerphone. "Henri, did Julian Thorne know this woman prior to 3 days ago?" A crackly voice filled the room. "No, sir. She waited on him. He got her fired. Then he came back and took her. It was a transaction." Silas slammed his hand on the table. "Fraud! The clause is void." "I move for an immediate vote to strip Julian of his voting rights." "Seconded," Sarah Jenkins said. "Wait!" Julian stood up, his fists clenched. "You cannot do this." "We just did," Silas grinned. "Unless your wife can prove she knows the real you, not the public figure, the man." Silas walked over to Clara. He leaned down, invading her personal space. "Tell us, darling, what is Julian's greatest fear?" The room went dead silent. Julian looked at Clara. He hadn't told her this. They hadn't covered fears. He looked at her with apology in his eyes. He was ready to lose the company to save her the embarrassment. Clara looked at Silas. She looked at the photo of Julian flinching. "His greatest fear isn't losing this company," Clara said quietly. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Is it losing you? Please, spare us the poetry." "No." Clara stood up. She walked toward the screen, standing next to the image of Julian flinching. "He didn't flinch because he was repulsed by me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He flinched because his arm hurts. Specifically, his right forearm." She turned to the board. 3 years ago, there was a fire at the Trenton plant. The media said Julian managed the crisis from his office. The truth is, he went inside. He pulled 2 shift workers out from under a collapsed beam. He suffered 3rd-degree burns on his right arm. He has permanent nerve damage. Sudden touches cause him pain. The board members exchanged stunned glances. This was classified medical information. Not even Sarah knew about the specific injury. "He never publicized it," Clara continued, locking eyes with Sarah Jenkins, "because he didn't want the stock price to dip due to a compromised CEO. He put the company before his own health. He bears that scar in silence, just like he bears the weight of this legacy." Clara turned back to Silas. "You asked what his greatest fear is. It's not poverty, it's not failure. His greatest fear is becoming a man without honor, a man like you, Silas." Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Julian looked at Clara with awe. She had taken the one vulnerability he showed her and turned it into a weapon to defend him. Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat. She looked at Silas, who was red in the face. "The medical records?" Sarah asked Julian. Julian unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up his sleeve. The angry, jagged scar was visible for all to see. "She speaks the truth," Julian said. Sarah nodded slowly. She closed her folder. "The board is satisfied. The marriage is legitimate. No paid actress would know the medical history we didn't even know." "This is ridiculous!" Silas screamed. "She's guessing!" "Sit down, Silas," Sarah ordered. "The motion is denied. Julian retains control of Thorn Global. Meeting adjourned." Julian let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a week. The board members filed out, some shaking Julian's hand, offering apologies. When the room was finally empty, save for the 2 of them, Julian turned to Clara. "You saved me," he said. "You actually saved me." "We had a deal," Clara said, though her heart was pounding. "I protect you. You protect me." Julian walked over to her. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something hotter. "That wasn't part of the deal. That was something else." He reached out, this time intentionally, and cupped her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Clara didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. "Clara," he whispered. The doors burst open. It was the head of security, looking pale. "Mr. Thorne, you need to come. Now." "What is it?" Julian asked, not dropping his hand from Clara's face. "It's your mother's car, the Mustang. Someone broke into the garage in Connecticut." Julian's face went cold. "The locket?" "Gone," the guard said, "and they left a note." Julian grabbed the note from the guard's hand. He read it, and his face turned to stone. He handed it to Clara. On the paper, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "You won the company, but you can't keep everything. If you want the ashes back, come to the old airfield at midnight. Come alone. Or, the waitress dies next." Clara read the words, a chill running down her spine. "Silas?" "Or Vanessa," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "It doesn't matter. They made a mistake." "What mistake?" Clara asked. "They threatened my wife," Julian said. He grabbed Clara's hand. "And I burned the world down for what is mine." The drive to the abandoned Northfield airstrip was silent, heavy with the weight of unsaid words. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, slashing against the windshield of the SUV like shrapnel. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel, his knuckles white. The other hand rested on the gear shift, close to Clara's, but not touching. He had tried to leave her at the penthouse. He had ordered security to lock her in. But Clara had looked him in the eye and said, "You said I was your wife. A wife doesn't let her husband walk into a trap alone." Now the airstrip loomed ahead, a desolate stretch of cracked concrete surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting hangars. "Stay in the car," Julian commanded, killing the engine. "If you hear shots, you drive. You don't look back." "Julian." "Promise me, Clara." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through his composure. "I can lose the company. I can lose the locket. I cannot lose you." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. It was the first time he had admitted it out loud. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Be careful." Julian stepped out into the rain. He walked toward the center of the runway, where a single pair of headlights blinded him. Standing in the beam of the lights were two figures, Silas Vance holding a sleek black pistol, and Vanessa Sterling holding a small silver locket. "Punctual as always, Julian," Silas shouted over the roar of the wind. "I admire that." "Let's get this over with," Julian yelled back, hands raised. "I'm here. Give me the locket." Vanessa stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking on the wet tarmac. Her hair was wild, her eyes manic. She looked nothing like the polished socialite of Fifth Avenue. She looked unhinged. "You want this old thing?" she taunted, dangling the locket by its chain. "It's pathetic, Julian. You built an empire, yet you cry over a piece of tin because you miss Mommy." "Don't talk about her," Julian growled, stepping forward. Silas aimed the gun at Julian's chest. "Stay right there. The papers are on the hood of the car. Transfer of ownership. All voting rights go to me. Sign it, and you get your memory back. Refuse, and Vanessa tosses it into that burning barrel." She gestured to a rusted oil drum beside her, flames licking the rim. Julian looked at the locket. It was the last piece of his humanity, the last thing that proved he was someone before the money. But then he thought of Clara in the car behind him. If he signed, Silas would own everything. He would destroy the company, the employees, and he would likely kill Julian anyway to tie up loose ends. "I'll sign," Julian said, his voice dead. He walked toward the hood of their car. He picked up the pen. Inside the SUV, Clara watched through the rain-streaked windshield. She saw Julian's defeat. She saw Silas's cruel grin. And she saw something else. Vanessa was standing too close to the barrel. And behind Vanessa, the fuel cap of Silas's car was open, a rag stuffed in it. A Molotov cocktail prepared for a quick getaway or destruction, but currently unlit. Clara looked at the gear shift. She looked at Julian, who was about to sign away his life. "I am not a waitress," she thought. "I am a restoration expert, and I am about to restore the balance." Clara climbed into the driver's seat. She slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The engine roared like a beast waking up. Silas spun around, distracted by the noise. "What the—" "Julian, get down!" Clara screamed, though he couldn't hear her. Julian, realizing what was happening, dove to the wet pavement. Clara swerved the massive SUV, not aiming for the people, but for Silas's car. She clipped the back bumper of their sedan, sending it spinning. The impact knocked Silas off his feet, the gun skittering across the tarmac. Vanessa shrieked, stumbling back. She dropped the locket. It clattered onto the concrete, inches from the burning barrel. "No!" Vanessa screamed, diving for it. Not to save it, but to throw it in the fire. Julian scrambled up from the ground. He tackled Vanessa, just as her hand closed around the chain. They rolled on the wet asphalt, a tangle of limbs and fury. Silas was getting up, reaching for his gun. Clara slammed on the brakes, threw the door open, and ran. She didn't run to Julian. She ran to the gun. She slid across the wet pavement like a baseball player sliding into home plate, her hand closing around the cold steel of the pistol just as Silas lunged for her. She rolled onto her back, pointing the gun with shaking hands at Silas's chest. "Stop!" Clara screamed. "Don't move!" Silas froze, his eyes wide. He looked at the waitress, soaked to the bone, mud on her face, holding the weapon with a grip of steel. "You won't shoot," Silas sneered, taking a step. "You're a nobody. You serve coffee." I served you your last warning, Clara said, her voice dropping an octave, terrifyingly calm. I have nothing to lose, Silas. Try me. Silas hesitated. In that split second of doubt, sirens wailed in the distance. Julian's security team. The police. Silas turned to run, but Julian had already subdued Vanessa. He stood up, blood trickling from his lip, and tackled Silas from behind, driving him into the ground. The runway flooded with blue and red lights. "It's over!" officers shouted, weapons drawn. Clara lowered the gun, her hands finally trembling. She dropped it on the ground and collapsed to her knees, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She felt strong arms wrap around her. Julian pulled her up, crushing her against his soaked shirt. He buried his face in her neck, shaking. "You crazy, reckless, wonderful woman," he choked out. "You could have been killed." "I told you," Clara whispered, holding on to him for dear life. "I have a very specific set of skills. Driving in New York traffic is one of them." Julian pulled back, looking at her face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver locket. It was scratched, but safe. "You saved it," he said. "I saved you," she corrected. 1 week later, the sun streamed into the penthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The boxes were packed. Clara taped the last box shut. It contained her few clothes, her old apron, and the recipe books she had bought with her allowance. The year wasn't up, but the contract was void. The danger was over. Silas and Vanessa were facing charges for kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder. The board had issued a formal apology. Julian was safe. His company was secure. "You're leaving," a voice said from the doorway. Clara turned. Julian was leaning against the doorframe. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, the color of the ocean before a storm. "The deal is done," Clara said, forcing a smile. "You have your company. My mom has the deed to her house. The medical debts are paid. We're even." "Even," Julian repeated. He walked into the room, stopping a few feet from her. "So it was just a job?" "It was a very well-paid job," Clara lied, her heart breaking. "And the way you looked at me at the airfield, was that in the contract?" "Method acting," Clara said, her voice trembling. Julian shook his head. He reached into his pocket, but instead of a check, he pulled out a small velvet box. "I spoke to the lawyers this morning," he said. "I tore up the prenup." Clara's eyes widened. "What? Julian, that's billions of dollars. If I leave now, I could take half." "I know," Julian said. He took a step closer. "But you won't, because you aren't a gold digger, Clara. You're the woman who drove a car into a gunman to save a man who treated her like an employee." He opened the box. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple band of white gold, engraved with tiny vines. "This isn't a prop," Julian said, his blue eyes piercing hers. "This isn't for the cameras. This isn't for the board. I don't want a fake wife, Clara. I want a partner. I want the woman who knows my scars and isn't afraid of them. I love you." Clara covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "You love me?" "I have loved you since you stood up to me in the restaurant and told me the truth," Julian admitted. "I was just too scared to admit it. Please, don't go. Stay. Not as an employee. As my wife, for real." Clara looked at the boxes. She looked at the door. Then she looked at the man who had given her everything, yet somehow needed her more than she needed him. "I have one condition," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "Anything," Julian promised. "Name it." "I'm not cooking at home," she laughed through her tears. "I'm sick of serving food." Julian laughed, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Deal. We'll order takeout. Forever." He kissed her, and this time there were no cameras, no contracts, and no lies. Just the truth. The headline on the New York Chronicle read, "Thorne Global Stocks Soar as CEO and Wife Open Charity Kitchen." The photo showed Julian and Clara laughing, covered in flour. She was pregnant, her hand resting on a small bump, and Julian was looking at her like she was the only woman in the world. In the corner of the kitchen, pinned to a corkboard, was an old, stained receipt from the Sapphire Lounge. It was the only reminder of the life they had left behind, and the lie that had turned into the greatest truth of all. And that is how a single moment of honesty changed the course of two lives forever. Clara lost her job for telling the truth, but she gained a love that was worth more than any billion-dollar empire. It makes you wonder, how many of us would have the courage to speak up like Clara did, and how many of us would be brave enough to trust again like Julian? This story proves that sometimes, when your world falls apart, it's actually falling into place. True love isn't about contracts or money. It's about finding the person who will drive into the fire to save you. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and redemption, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss the next dramatic episode. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.